Hey guys, Miss Lerner here, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about cognitive development, especially Piaget's theories and some modern day interpretations of Piaget's theories. So, as we know, as we met him through the summer seminar, Jean Piaget was a cognitive developmental psychologist, and he actually worked in Alfred Binet's laboratory, devising IQ tests. And the funny part is that he was somewhat dissatisfied with what was going on there, and he thought that it was very interesting that children's minds tended to work in a different way than adults' minds did. Okay, so that's what really led to him starting his research on cognition. Okay, and he really studied his own children in looking at these activities associated with thought. I keep moving myself. Let's try over here. Okay, so his core belief was that a child's mind developed in a pretty predictable set of stages. Okay, and like as I said, an 8-year-old's mind is going to function very differently than a toddler's mind, and there's going to be several benchmarks that indicate how thought progresses. Okay. So he came up with this idea known as schemas. Schemas are mental models or concepts about the world. Okay, they're almost like categorizations of things, objects, people. Um, our whole world, he said, was a struggle to make sense of our experiences, and in order to make sense of our experiences, we had to have expectations about our world, and these were schemas. Okay, so for instance, a schema for a doggy might be that it has 4 legs, a furry coat, a long tail, a wet tongue, a cold nose, friendly and fun. Okay, all doggy. Okay. Now, when a child first sees a doggy, first sees a cat, it might actually, he or she might actually believe that um, that is a doggy because it fits into the already existing schema of doggy. Okay, so say a child only grew up, knowing doggies. The first time he looks out the window at the age of 2.5, when they're driving down a country road and the child sees a horse, he'll say something to the effect of "big doggy." And you turn around and say, "No, dummy, not a big doggy. No, obviously not." That's how the mind works, right? You're going when you're young, you're going to what we call assimilate information. Assimilation is a mental process that just kind of places a square peg in a round hole. Okay, it's the child doesn't realize that that's a horse yet. To them, it's a big doggy. It's taking something new and fitting it and inserting it into existing schemas. So, for instance, a baby will begin to suck a bottle the way he or she sucked a breast because of assimilation. Accommodation is really at the core of all cognitive development. Okay, it's when you see accommodation, think changes. Okay, this isn't the first time we've heard of the word accommodation. Accommodation is also the shifting of shape of the eye or the lens, rather, in order to focus the light on the back of the eye where the magic happens in the retina. In the same way, accommodation of schemas are when schemas shift shape and change so that newer information is better understood. Okay, so the second that in that example that I had given you about the horse, the second that 3-year-old knows that animal, that horse is not a doggy, that's accommodation. Okay, there's a new schema for horse. When a child learns that butterfly is not a bird. Okay, and making new schemas, as I said, is at the heart of cognitive development. Okay, changing the way that you think about the world is what makes you grow. Okay, so Yeah, I mean, if a new example doesn't fit our existing schema, we really just change it. Okay, accommodation, shifting this shape, this expectation. So we increase our cognitive understanding of our world through accommodation. Accommodation is what allows us to progress through Piaget's stages. Okay. Please understand the difference between assimilation and accommodation. Again, once more, assimilation is when you take new information and you kind of cram it into existing schemas, okay, or concepts that you have about the world. Accommodation is that moment, almost that aha moment, that insight that a horse is not a dog, okay, that you have you're building a new schema for new information. Okay, so accommodation allows a child to progress through the 4 stages of cognitive development. And these 4 stages of cognitive development are sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. So Piaget had a belief that children construct their world while interacting with it as a scientist. Okay. Um, as far as a mnemonic for remembering Piaget, the order of Piaget's stages, I remember it with the following: Santa, please come over for Oreos. Again, Santa, sensory motor, please, pre-operational, come over, concrete operational, for Oreos, formal operational. From about 0 to 2, children are in the sensory motor stage of development. And this is, a compound word, sensory and motor. So they're exploring the world through their senses and their motor abilities. Okay. And the big thing that happens in the sensory motor stage is the development of object permanence. So when you're very, very young, okay, and you're like 4 months old, and someone hides something under a blanket, you're not going to look for it because you don't have a mental representation of an object. You don't really understand that that thing is going to continue to exist when it's not in sight. Okay. Um, Object permanence is the awareness that objects continue to exist even when they're not in sight. And it's key to our understanding of the world. Okay. So Piaget, tested his own children, and he would show, his children a toy and cover it with his hat. And, before the age of about 6 months, the infant was going to act like the toy didn't exist. Okay. But by 8 months, um, infants started to look for the toy. Even if they started to make errors, they did start to look for the toy. Okay. They started to acquire what we call object permanence. Okay. And that's important because around the age of like 8 to 10 months is also going to be, when children start to make mental representations of their world. And they start to develop things like stranger anxiety. A stranger anxiety being, stress when their mother or father leaves the room, with a stranger and having a stranger there. Because before that, they don't realize that the person is going to continue to exist, and stay with them. Now, children at about 10 months, they say to themselves, "Mommy left. Where is mommy's doing something without me? Where is mommy? I don't even know." Okay. I mean, before the age of about 8 months, if you play peekaboo with a child, it's really an engaging experience for them. Because this is what it seems like for them. Mommy left. Mommy's back. Mommy left. Mommy's back. Okay. And then it kind of gets a little bit old hat after a while, and the child understands that they can do it too and manipulate it. As a criticism of Piaget, we now think that this is kind of an underestimate of babies' cognitive abilities. The way in which he was testing them required them to be able to be mobile and to be able to pick things up. When we change the testing environment and do what we call habituation studies and looking time studies of how long infants look at objects, we can see that object permanence may develop much faster than Piaget imagined. Okay. So this research that I'm about to go over is actually what I based my undergraduate thesis on whether 1-year-olds could actually count objects. They had a numerical understanding. And it came off of trying to modify Rene Biageron's impossible scene study. Okay, so Biageron devised these impossible scenes for babies to look at, like a car seeming to pass through a solid object, or an object just violating object permanence. And she saw that infants look longer when they explore these impossible scenes. Okay, why do they look longer? It's not like they make a like, oh my God. No, okay, they look longer because they're surprised. The impossible events are going to violate infants' expectations. Okay, so Karen Wynn did this little puppet show, like I said, that I modified in my thesis. There was objects placed in the case, and then you did this puppet show. You put the screen up. You take an empty hand. You remove one object, and then you make a big reveal. Okay, and what you can see is that there's either a possible outcome, like that there's one object there, or an impossible outcome, which is two objects. Okay. And if they look longer at the two objects, that means that they had some sort of numerical understanding. Okay. Really, that just demonstrates that babies do have some sort of understanding about object permanence, as well as something that appears to be numerical understanding at that age. Okay. When I did my study and modified it myself, I controlled for the subject I controlled for the area of the objects, the surface area, so that what would happen is that my hypothesis was maybe that babies were just looking longer because there was more stuff there rather than a numerical understanding. Okay, so I made like the two objects the same surface area as the one object and so forth. And I found through my study that babies actually did have some sort of counting understanding. From about 2 to 6 or 7 years of age, we have the pre-operational stage of development. Okay, we call it the pre-operational stage because babies don't yet, toddlers really, and young children do not really understand mental operations of concrete logic. Okay, so it's very difficult for someone that's younger than 6 to really start truly understanding how math works. Okay, there are various developmental milestones that indicate that a child is pre-operational. As I said, they don't have mental operations, but some other things that are really important. They believe in animistic thought or animism. Okay, so they think that objects have life and mental processes, and we know that this is really key to a lot of Disney movies, a lot of different shows. I'm a map, I'm a map, I'm a map, right? Centration is going to be something else that happens. Okay, it's the inability to consider more than one factor of an object at a time, and to almost focus entirely on one thing in deciding upon that object or that person. So, for instance, when my father always had a mustache. Okay, one day when I was about 5 years old, he came to the front door. He had shaved his mustache off. I would not let him in the house. I was freaking out and screaming that there was a stranger at our house because I had censored my opinion of my father based upon his mustache. Okay, anyone who has babysat two different age children in this stage knows that if you're giving them something like ice cream or something really desirable, you better give them the same size plate. Okay, why? Because even if you took like, a scoop of ice cream and put it on a bigger plate, and then you took the same exact scooper and showed them it's the same scoop of ice cream and then put it on a smaller plate. The children have centration, so they're going to look at the big plate and say, "She has more." Okay, so it's a phenomenon that is seemingly counterintuitive, but it makes sense because they can't do the operations in their head yet. Okay. And with this, there's irreversibility. So, if I dump out a box of crayons on the floor, I'm going to not think, it's never going to fit. It's not going to fit back in. Okay? I can't reverse that step. Okay? I can't reverse family relationships. I can ask my son, for instance, who's 5, do you have a sister? And he'll say, yeah. And then I'll say to him, well, does your sister have a brother? And he'll say, I don't know. Okay, that's irreversibility. Irreversibility and centration are the reason why people cannot pass what's called the conservation task, which we'll go into in a moment. Okay. So conservation is this principle that marked concrete operational reasoning that things like mass, volume, and number are going to remain the same despite changes in the forms of the object. Okay, so this is what is called the conservation task. And this is actually when a child passes this task at that age of 6 or 7, that's how we know that they have entered concrete operations. Okay, so you can see, when you have 2 glasses with the same amount of milk, and then you pour one, you show the kid, well, that has the same amount, and then you pour one glass into the tall glass, and you ask the child, a pre-operational child, which beaker or which glass has more. They're going, because of centration, they're going to say the taller one because it appears bigger. Okay. They also can't reverse it in their head. The second that the child says, hey, actually they're the same, we know that they're in concrete operations. In the pre-operational stage of development, there's a lot of pretend play, and this helps with language. This helps with, identity. Children are going to play with their emotions, and they're going to use things symbolically. Do you see my baby? My baby's here. This is when imaginary friends come about. Okay. So just to show you about how important symbolic function is in cognitive development, between the age of, 2.5 and 3, there's going to be a huge kind of jump. Okay, so there was a psychologist named Judy Deloach who showed children a model of a room and hid a stuffed dog behind the couch in that room. Okay, the 2.5-year-olds remembered where to find that toy. Okay, but they couldn't use the model to locate that stuffed dog in an actual room. Okay, the 3-year-olds, however, could point right to the stuffed animal in the real world, showing that they could represent it and actually use that knowledge in real life. Probably the most important piece of pre-operational development is egocentrism. Egocentrism is not being egocentric or egotistical, okay? Usually we use it interchangeably in our society with thinking that everything, that you're better than other people, and things of that nature. But that's not what it means in psychology, okay? Egocentrism in developmental psychology means the inability to understand that other people have thoughts, emotions, and desires other than your own. Okay, so you feel like your thoughts are everyone's thoughts. Your desires are everyone's desires. Okay, you play hide and seek, and since you are hidden, okay, and you can't see anybody, they can't see you. Okay, So in this example, a 4-year-old girl shows her grandpa a match on 2 memory game cards that face her, not her grandpa, because she thinks that her grandpa can magically see them because she can see them. Okay. You know, when I ask, my daughter, what should we get mommy for Mother's Day? She's 3. She'll say, a baby doll, right? Because that's what she wants. It's not what I want. She doesn't understand. Once my children are concrete operations, they'll understand that I have desires that are, other than theirs. Okay. So, a 4-year-old might show her aunt over, toys over a telephone call, like not FaceTime wise, just over old school regular cell phones, thinking that your aunt can see them too. Okay, if you ask a child to show mommy your picture, that child in preoperational will hold the picture facing their own eyes. Okay, now just like in sensory motor stage, you are going to start out with no object permanence and develop object permanence within the stage. The same thing happens in pre-operations. Okay, you start out with egocentric thought, okay, and then you are going to develop what's called a theory of mind, which is essentially the opposite of egocentrism, okay. And around the age of 5-ish, this starts to come about, okay, that you can understand that other people have mental thoughts and states other than your own, okay, and you can kind of predict how people might think, okay. So before, the age of 5, it's really hard to, get kids at least to develop, empathy and to share. But once theory of mind does develop, then it's going to be, a very dramatic change. Suddenly, children are going to make decisions based on not only how they feel, but about how they imagine other people feel. Okay, so what I'm showing you right now is the famous Sally Ann task. Okay, the psychologist who did this was my mentor in college at Rutgers. Okay. Now, theory of mind is going to be played out by this, again, kind of like this puppet show. Okay. So children are going to view a doll named Sally and a doll named Anne. Okay. So Sally leaves her ball in a red cupboard. Okay. Another doll, Anne, moves the ball to the blue cupboard. Okay. But, Sally had left when that had happened. Okay. So when Sally returns, where will she look for the ball? Okay. So when asked the question above, okay, 85% of the children in the study answered the question correctly. This showed that although the subjects knew that the ball had been moved, they demonstrated theory of mind in knowing that Sally would not have known. Okay. Now that being said, that's when they're older. When you're 3 or 4, they're going to say that Sally's going to look for the ball where they moved it. Why? Because they saw that the ball was moved, and they think that they saw that the ball was moved, that of course Sally would know that the ball was moved as well. I'll say this again. The one way we know that children are in the concrete operational stage is that they pass the conservation task. Okay, that task where you take the big long beaker and the short fat beaker, and you ask which has more liquid after seeing that the same amount of liquid has been poured in both. Okay. Concrete operational stage is going to be between 7 and 11, and it's a logical stage. It's concrete, it's tangible. You're able to do math, it's operational. The last stage of Piaget's cognitive developmental theory is the formal operational stage, normally beginning at about age 12, okay? When it goes beyond the concrete and the tangible, and people start to imagine a world of hypotheticals. Of abstract thought. One other criticism of Piaget is that that not everyone actually has or does meet the criteria for formal operations. Okay. So we have systematic reasoning, like if this, then that. Okay, we can take logic and pinpoint it to and generalize it to the extreme. We can imagine realities and symbols that don't exist in formal operations. Hopefully, you're there. One critic of Jean Piaget was Lev Vygotsky. As I said, he was the only theorist that was a continuous theorist, thinking that development kind of unfolded like the same way you got taller, just very, very slowly and gradually. And instead of thinking about the scientific inquiry of the world like Piaget did, Lev Vygotsky focused on the social piece, the importance of social interaction. Okay, so they often say that Vygotsky's child is a young apprentice rather than a young scientist, okay, because he emphasized the growth through the social environment. Okay, so what can you accomplish with other people around you versus being alone? What kind of role do peers and mentors have on your development? Scaffolding is a framework that offers children support as they develop higher levels of thinking. And it's almost like making a ladder to get better at something. You start out really low, and then with the right support, you're going to enable that child or that young adult to get much further up than you would have been able to before. Okay, and ideally, this is what teachers strive to do, to scaffold instruction to improve throughout the year until you get to the top. Probably Vygotsky's most important contribution was the zone of proximal development. This is the idea that there's a difference between what a child can do alone and then what a child can do with help. Okay. And this zone can be very large, right? And children are going to learn best when their social environment is right in that sweet spot, that zone. Okay. And in today's world of the pandemic, it has implications for the zone of proximal development because we're not having as much social interaction as we used to. We're not having hands-on kinds of instruction within the classroom, and because of that, that zone is really shrinking. Okay, it's mostly what you can do on your own, and I think that that's why people are saying that the online model is failing because of the lack of the social component that leads to the zone of proximal development. When children don't have a theory of mind, or they have problems with their theory of mind, and we think that there might actually be a module in the brain, symbolically, we're not exactly sure where it is, called the theory of mind module, that may be absent in children with autism and autism spectral disorder. Okay. Autism is going to be something we come back to when we talk about disorders of infancy and childhood, but it's a disorder that is going to be marked by deficiencies in social interaction and communication, by fixations on several interests or tics and repetitive behaviors, and frequently intellectual disability. Okay, but it is a spectrum disorder, which means that really no two cases of autism spectrum disorder are going to look the same. Okay, it can be very mild to extremely severe. Okay, so the rates are going up. We're not exactly sure why. We don't know if it's because more people are getting diagnosed because it's known. In the past, maybe someone would say, well, that child, is a little strange, but now they meet the criteria for ASD. It could be because of environmental reasons like pollutants. I am going to say that 1 in 68 American children overall are going to get diagnosed with ASD by age 8, and in New Jersey, it's something like 1 in 24. New Jersey has the highest rate of autism spectral disorder or spectrum disorder in the entire world. Okay, just food for thought. Okay, so yeah, there's the impaired theory of mind, the lack of eye contact, the lack of communication among brain regions that usually allow us to take another's viewpoint and have empathy, the inability of mirror neurons to fire. All of these things are contributing to autism spectrum disorder. In the Sally Ann task, when you ask children who have autism spectral disorder where Sally is going to look for the ball, they're pretty much universally going to say they're going to look for it in the blue cupboard, okay, not recognizing that Sally wouldn't know that the ball had moved. So the experience of ASD is going to differ along the spectrum, you know, from the most severe where you struggle to use language to a very, very mild and functional experience of ASD. Okay, so that was cognitive development. We're going to also focus on social development as well as moral development in the classroom. Okay, but I just wanted you to get a good framework for when we go over this. All right, it's been a pleasure as always. Signing out.